Welcome to Talent Titans, the podcast where we bring you entrepreneurs and leaders from the global staffing industry. I'm your host, Suki Sodi. Now let's jump right on in and welcome today's Titan. Hi, welcome to another episode of Talent Titans. I'm your host, Suki Sodi. I am super excited about today's guest. I actually met her last week at Thrive at the Staffing World Summit in, Nashville. So let's dive straight in. Ziba, welcome. Do you want to introduce yourself? Now, see, I just messed up. I didn't even tell anybody what company you're from. So I'm going to let you do that. Right?
Oh my gosh. No, it's exciting. I love talking about my company, so I'll do it. My name is Ziba Alizadeh. I'm the vice president for our healthcare solutions for RemX, an EmployBridge company. So EmployBridge Healthcare Solutions, also known as RemX. We're kind of in the middle of going through two names.
Okay, cool. As I said, we met last week at Thrive, and I do want to talk about your presentation. But let's start off with, how did you get into the industry? And how did you end up in healthcare?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in staffing for 20 years. And I think like many people in our industry, I kind of fell into it. I was taking night classes at a community college, and the person sitting in front of me was talking about positions and their job. And someone asked me what I did, and I used to work retail, and they said, "Oh, you must love it." And I said, "Actually, no, I'm looking for an office job." So the person in front of me turned around and said, "You always speak up in class. I love your energy. I do have a job that I can give you. It's only 1 day a week, and it's a file clerk position." And I said, "Sure, I'll take it." So it started from there. It so happened to be an executive search firm in the real estate space. I started as a file clerk, then I became her administrative assistant, and then an executive assistant. And then one day she asked me if I wanted to learn the business, and I said, sure. That's how I got into it. I've held, various positions. I've done recruiting, I've done sales, I've ran a perm desk. Majority of my background started in the professional space, so IT, finance and accounting, business operations support. And then about 7 or 8 years ago, we started working with healthcare organizations. And I think everyone remembers what happened in 2020. So in 2020, our clients, of course, started asking us if we would do clinical staffing, and we said yes. And we became very good at it. So we became our own division and started kind of doing that nationwide. So I now manage our healthcare business line throughout the country for both East Coast as well as West Coast.
Now, I was reading, and we were talking about before we went live. Yes. Now, may have got the numbers wrong, but something like 50% of healthcare jobs go uncovered?
Yes, absolutely. Healthcare is probably one of the hottest markets throughout the nation. I actually sit on American Staffing Association's healthcare committee, and the leaders and I that are part of the committee, we always talk about the healthcare space. So in September, the healthcare sector added 57,000 jobs alone. I apologize, 45,000 jobs, but the average monthly is 57. So it was a little lower, but those numbers have been consistent, anywhere from 40 to 50, 60,000 jobs every single month. And what's very interesting is that the consistency has been in home health, hospitals, and also residential care facilities, like nursing and residential care facilities. So every month, the healthcare sector has been adding these jobs. Unfortunately, there's not enough talent in the marketplace to be able to cover those positions. So a lot of healthcare organizations are right now struggling with really being able to not just attract, but also retain healthcare talent.
Okay, so I've got two questions. Mm-hmm. Why such a shortage? Now, and if let's be clear, I look at the UK NHS, we're struggling for healthcare talent. Mm-hmm. Here in Canada, I always joke, if I'm going to have a heart attack, I want to have a heart attack in one of the cabs, because the likelihood it is a doctor from somewhere else, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then, of course, then COVID happened.
Sure.
And I've got friends in the healthcare space, and I'll just stick with the US, who just burnt out. They were just couldn't do it anymore. They left. Others left for other more, let's call it political reasons. Why do you think there's such a shortage now?
Absolutely. I think, a lot of healthcare workers are burnt out, right? Like you mentioned. I remember during the COVID years when I would go meet with clients, you could see the mask marks on their faces, and they were working 12 to 14-hour days. A lot of physicians, were not able to go home, especially in the beginning days. They didn't know what it was, so they didn't want to take it to their families. From a mental health perspective, and not to digress, but a lot of healthcare professionals had to observe things that they had never probably observed, different people losing lives. And I think they just got burnt out. So I think it's that. The other part of it is some healthcare employees have decided to leave because of the gig economy, because they made so much money during COVID, and healthcare organizations spent so much money as well, that they just are feeling as if, okay, unless you're giving me, the big bucks, I'm not going back, right? I'm not doing this. And a lot of them, especially in the hospital setting, a lot of healthcare employees don't want to work in the healthcare hospital setting, mainly because of the hours, right? So majority of them opt to work in doctors' offices and clinics because they say, well, I get to go home at night. I get to
Yep.
have my weekends, versus having to work around the clock, right? So I think a lot of that is going on. What's interesting is that SIA had recently talked about how healthcare employees, and this was actually last year during one of their conferences, but they had mentioned that healthcare employees are looking for respect. They're not quite looking for money anymore, right? They're just kind of looking for that respect, that culture. And it just speaks to the fact that they are burnt out, right? They just want a little bit of normalcy back into their lives.
It's interesting because I hadn't looked at it like that. So I'm just thinking, one of my girlfriends,
Mhm.
she's on the East Coast in the US. And I remember we'd jump on a Zoom catching up, and she'd literally be at the clinic, hospital. And
Yes.
you're right, you could see the indents from the mask on her face.
Yes. Yes.
So I figured that the long hours, I figured, but unsung heroes, because I hadn't thought about the mental drain, that emotional drain. Yes, they're used to death, but to your point, this wasn't something they had seen, right? Or
Right.
come, or hadn't learnt in
Yes.
uni and things like that,
Yes.
but also taking it home. So, what are some of the things you as a company are doing to help? Because we need these nurses, doctors, healthcare workers.
Absolutely.
What are
Yeah.
some of the things Employee Bridge are doing to help bridge that gap?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question. So I think as a company, one thing that we're very well known for is we take care of our clients and we take care of our associates. As an organization, we offer our work life academy that allows our temporary associates to better themselves, take classes if they want. We have programs where we recognize our top talent once a year. So we try to give back as much as possible, which is helping with that piece of I want to be respected, and I
Yep.
want to feel as if I have value. So we do a lot of that. And I think from a recruiting perspective, we always try to identify talent through non-traditional methodologies, right? So we can provide that type of value to our clients. Now, I know there's a lot of organizations that, there's been talks about as a whole in the country, do we now look at outside of the country talent, right? Do we start, I don't know if you recall, but back in the .com era, right? When technology blew up, a lot of companies started offering visas to talent outside of the United States. So now there's certainly talk about, do we start doing that, right? As a country to healthcare employees, because not a lot of people are actually coming out of the school system. And then the ones that are coming out of the school system, they either get jobs through their school programs, right? Or they have to have some sort of an experience under their belt before being hired. So there's definitely a lot of talk about that. But we do a lot of research for our clients to kind of make sure that we're educating them, right? We, of course, have our leadership, that talk about the market and what they're seeing, and kind of like having discussions with our clients on how do we hold each other accountable and make sure that we are attracting the top talent and then also keeping them. Again, you don't want your healthcare employees leaving for whether it's more pay or a better culture. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in that space as well. So we try to kind of be the pioneers in that.
It's interesting you said about looking internationally, because that is the norm in the UK. right? So
Yes.
international nurses, doctors,
Right.
healthcare professionals. Same here in Canada. Obviously not to
Yes.
the same scale as it is in the UK, but the
Yes.
same here. So I find it really fascinating that the US
Mhm.
hasn't looked at acquiring international talent,
Well,
right?
to be transparent, we've done
Okay.
that, but I think it's become the United States has done that, right? It's nothing like you mentioned. UK is doing it, Canada is doing it, the US has been doing it, but I think now it's really time to look at, do we start to really put programs around that, right?
Yeah.
I recently met with a client and I thought this was very creative, but they have an education program where they hire individuals right out of school and they train them, and then as a part of that, and a lot of our clients are doing that, they kind of have the person sign a contract with them saying, okay, you'll have the job for however many years, right? So we've done that, but I think recently, and just seeing the numbers and the fact that the positions aren't being filled, it's more of, okay, do we now start putting a lot of focus on this, right? And do we now make this a thing where we allow more of that, right? Within different organizations, we make that the new norm rather.
Yeah, and it's interesting because my clients that do it internationally,
Hmm.
they have the whole program, right? So I'm just going to make this up. They've got a doctor out of India or South Africa. They're
Right.
qualified there. Then they go through these, and it skips my mind, but they go through these programs, these courses. So then when they get into the UK, they are as qualified as a UK counterpart. But I want
Right.
to pivot slightly because, as I said, I do want to talk about your presentation last week.
Sure.
However, you have grown up in this industry. One of the things that I want to talk about is your leadership style.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and just say what I said earlier. When I met you, I loved it. I thought you really had your masculine, feminine energy. You really balanced it really well. But having said that, that's because I get told I'm very alpha. Oh,
Right.
alpha, right? Tone it down type of thing. So I want to talk about that because it's an elephant in the room in many, many cases because you and I are in leadership roles. We get told
Absolutely.
we're too alpha, too masculine,
Right.
tone it down, we're too much, we're too this, too that, too this. Where our male counterparts, the heroes,
Yes.
the heroes,
Yes. Yeah.
right? So I want to just talk about a little bit about how you embrace that.
Hmm. Absolutely.
And then almost, I don't want to know, I don't mean where it came from, but almost because you've got a story of how you tuned into that side, right? So
Yes.
let's talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you make such a great point because I know countless, leaders that you can talk to and they'll say, "Well, I've heard that before, right? I'm too alpha or I'm too masculine, right?" But I think that a big part of it is our industry. So, I always joke about this. My whole family, they don't know what I do, right? You talk about it all day, and then at the end of the day, I'm sure you go through the same thing, right? You're like, what is it that you do? But I think a big part of it is, I've always said it takes a certain type of person to do what we do, right? Because we go through every single human emotion in one
Yep.
morning. So I think it's important to take that into account, is that our industry requires us to be tough, right? And rough around the edges to handle the things that get thrown at us. Now, personally, I mean, I'm a huge tomboy and I've been like always a big sports fan, but I think for me personally, I'm not originally from here. I actually moved to the United States when I was 13 years old, so I didn't speak any English. So English is my third language. I'm half Persian, half Turkish. And when I moved here, my father basically told me I had 3 months to learn English. So I learned English reading the dictionary, right? And got a job at age 14, and I've been working since. So I think that's a big part of it, is that because the language is not my first language, and then I had to overcome a lot of obstacles with that, right? With that comes a little bit of, you have to do more, you have to work harder, you have to show up better, right, than everybody else. So I think that's a big part of why I've been tough, right? It's like, okay, you have to be tough to make it, right? To
Yep.
come to this country, to learn it, and then to as I said, I started as a file clerk, right? And, telling myself that I'm going to grow in this industry. I'm going to be a vice president. I'm going to run a business line, right? Talking about the presentation right last week, right?
Yeah.
Words do matter. So kind of saying that. So I think that's a big part of it. And then just on a personal level, I'm the baby of five. So, I always joke in my family, in order to get attention, you have to be loud and obnoxious for anybody to give you 2 seconds. And because I was the baby and my siblings were older than me, they didn't really want to spend too much time with me. So I grew up with my two nephews where they
Ah.
were almost as if they were my little brothers. So I hung out around them a lot. So I think a part of it is also potentially, taking that, right? And, when you look at your childhood and what you were kind of exposed to, you're like, okay, it makes sense why the person is the way they are. So I think for me personally, it's probably a little bit of that. But I also think that, it's unfortunate. It is in our industry or any industry for that matter, right? In the corporate world, it's difficult because as a woman, you have to try or you sometimes feel like you have to do a little better, right? And you also have to be sensitive around what the perception is, right?
Yep.
You look at we talked about this at Thrive, right? You look at the women, the numbers of women that apply for a job that they're qualified for are significantly lower than men who will apply for the job if they only meet 60% of the criteria. So I think that's a big part of it as well, is that a lot of women feel, okay, I have to have it together, right? I have to put on a certain persona. I have to be strong. I have to lead, but it can come off, right? So there's a big difference to me as being alpha, right? And somebody who's masculine, right? So being alpha is part of the requirement, right, of the role and what it takes. And speaking your mind as hard as it is, right? Having to kind of do those things. So I would say that's probably it for me.
Yep.
But of course, I think my personal experiences and me not, growing up here and all of that, of course, has led to it as well.
Well, I was told when I first came into recruiting and I worked
Mhm.
with a bunch of guys, and they gave
Mhm.
me three, I clearly remember it. They gave me three bits of advice. One was sort out your handshake,
Mhm.
okay? Strong
Yes.
handshake grip. One was never let anyone see you cry or be
Yes. I've
upset.
heard that too. I've heard
Yeah,
that
that was
too.
the advice. And the
Yes.
third advice I was given was learn to drink.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
so
Of
it's
course.
weird. I
Yes.
would that was a three bits of advice
Yes.
I was given when I first came into the staffing industry
Yes.
was
Absolutely.
never let anyone see you cry.
Yes.
Never show emotion, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the handshake. But if you look at all of those, it's very masculine
Of
traits, and
course.
right?
Yes, absolutely. They are. They're extremely. I mean, the new one, I've always said this to myself. I know colleagues who play golf, and I've said this on more than one occasion that I want to learn golf because that's where business gets done, right? But I absolutely agree with you is, I've always said like there's no crying in recruiting, right? You that's what you were taught. You don't cry
Yeah,
in recruiting. You hold it
get on
together.
with it.
You never let anybody see your emotions, right? And it's interesting because whether you're a male leader or a female leader, isn't it funny how our industry and as our society is changing, right? We're starting to embrace mental health a little more now. And,
Yep,
I did a talk at Staffing World, right? One of the tech talks was about that, is that I, as a leader, had to learn very, like, through, hard effort, right? And work on how do I deal with that, right? We're now talking about, now we're trying to embrace, let's lead from the heart, right? Even though
yep.
we were all taught, don't do that,
Don't
right?
do
Keep them,
that.
keep them
Yep.
separate. Now it's like, okay, let's learn to kind of bring it together.
But it's hard as a leader, and
Hmm.
especially our personalities, because you got to adapt. You're expected to be able to adapt. Like,
Hmm.
look, let me back up a second. Yes, chameleons, you adapt to your audience,
Right,
right?
right, right.
But we're also saying at the same time, be authentic,
Yes, yes,
right?
yeah,
So my natural style is I'm going to call a spade a spade. If
yes,
something's gone wrong, I'm going to say this has gone wrong. What are we
right,
doing about it? Then I'm going to get over it and I forget about it.
yeah,
Right, done.
yes,
Let's go. Don't make that same mistake, but let's go. Right
yes,
now, I've been told no because what you're not thinking about is how the other person is feeling.
Right.
And I look at it and I say, well, hold on a second. This is business.
Right.
And yes, absolutely, training need, what's happened, all of that. But come on,
Sure.
okay, now let's go because we still got a job to do. And I
Yes.
watch my male clients that, whether it's on the placement side or on the coaching side,
Right.
they'll tell me stuff, and I'll be like, so nobody said this back to you? And then I think, in my case and or
Yes.
my experience, I'd be like, hang on a second, it's almost not fair in many ways, right? Because
Yes. Yes.
as women, we're expected to act
Hmm.
differently in a situation. Yet at the same time, we're talking about equality.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
it's almost gone crazy because this leads me very, very nicely into last week.
Yes.
So just to give everybody more context, I was at Thrive, which is the American Staffing Association annual summit for women. It happens a couple of days before Staffing World. So that's where you and I met. We were sitting
Yes.
next to each other actually on the table.
Yes. Absolutely.
And we got chatting. And then we found out Janelle. Actually,
Yes.
that's how it was because Janelle, one of your colleagues, messaged you and said, oh, you're sitting next to Ziggy.
Yes,
So we
absolutely. And
got
Janelle's
talking.
my leader, which, by the way, I just have to give a huge shout out. Sorry to interrupt you,
That's
Suki,
okay.
but she was the one who was like very supportive and motivated me to go to Thrive and Staffing World that first year. So it's amazing how things turn around, right? And then, of
Yeah.
course, she texted me and said, "Oh my gosh, you're sitting to my next to one of my favorite people, Suki." And of course, I looked at you. I'm like, "Hey, we need to meet." So sorry, go ahead.
It's a small world, right? Janelle
Very
has a
small.
following. Janelle
Yes.
has a following. So we got talking, and then what happened? And then you got up on stage. And
Yes.
when you got up on stage, I was like, damn it, I got to get this girl on a podcast. Because here's the thing, we've just talked about as women
Hmm.
what we are meant to do, not meant to do. I remember when I came into recruiting, we were not allowed to wear trousers, had to be a
Yes.
skirt.
Yes.
Right? I mean,
Yes.
Jesus Christ, you think about it, and you think, how the hell did they
Or
get
the
away with it?
closed-toed shoes. I remember that.
Yes.
The stocking and the closed-toed shoes if
Yep.
you were wearing a dress or a skirt, you know. So,
Yep.
yes.
Yep. There you go. Right.
Yes.
And now, and then you're on stage last week.
Yes.
And I remember listening to you and I'm thinking, God, there are so many. And I'm saying female leaders are up and coming, but it can apply to men as well. Right.
Yes.
But Thrive
Absolutely.
was for women. So that's why we're
Yes.
using that context.
Right.
And you got up on stage. And I want to let you tell the story of what you said.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I feel so very lucky to have met you amongst many other women and men. Like you said, we have a lot of allies there as well. So
Yep.
I was very thankful to them. And it's interesting how you say we just talked about like being authentic and who you are. And for anyone that knows me, I always say I'm like I can come off very intimidating, but I'm very fun, loud, and obnoxious, right? And a big part of it was, hey, be who you truly are and do not worry about what anyone else's perception is. And I think that was a big thing that I had to work on before going in. So let's kind of like go back a little bit so I can tell you
Sure.
how it all started. As
Yeah.
I mentioned, last year was my first year attending Thrive and Staffing World. I always knew about the American Staffing Association through, of course, Joni Bailey, right? She was
Yep.
part of the board of directors. So always knew about it. Last year, I was certainly very excited. I had the opportunity to go. And I remember how excited I was. And I thought it was life changing. I mean, I got every single book that they talked about. And I made sure I read all of them by the time I came back. I mean, I read everything within like 2 months, right? I remember walking or coming back and I was being picked up from the airport. And my husband asked me how it was. And I said, amazing. And I'm telling him all this stuff. And the words out of my mouth were, next year, I'm going to be on that stage in Nashville. And I have never done public speaking. I didn't know how I was going to get there. But it's interesting because, like many other things in my life, I said this last week as well. I believe in the fact that words do matter. I just mentioned to you that I moved here when I was 13. When I was back home, I used to always say to my friends, one day I'm going to go to America. And that was my thing as a child, right? I would be like, oh, I'm going to go to America. And I would pretend I didn't know how to speak English, but I would pretend as if I was speaking English. And I remember my first year in high school, a girl that I had gone to middle school with. She called me by my last name. She was like, "Hey, Alizadeh, I thought you were going to go to America and send us all Barbies, right?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, I'm still going to go. And since you haven't grown up, I will still send you a Barbie." And of course, I'm a teenager, right? And sure enough, I moved here within 6 months. So words do really matter. And that's why I share that. So last year, obviously, after saying that, I signed up. There was a lot of amazing leaders that, of course, pushed me to do it and told me to do it. And I was very lucky. I was one of the individuals that were picked. And the topic, as you know, was words matter. I actually did two. One was words matter. The other one was the new pandemic, mental health in corporate America. It was definitely nerve wracking. I will say that. I mean, it was amazing to go on with other women who were also in the same situation I was, but it was exciting. It was nerve wracking. But I remember being backstage, and I had read that Tony Robbins jumps on a trampoline before he goes on stage because he wants to get the adrenaline out. Because I was asking every single leader that I know that has done speaking, to give me their, tools, right, that they use. So
Yep.
it's funny because I was standing backstage and I was jumping up and down. The mic fell apart, and the person that had gone before me, she was on stage. She just started laughing because she saw me jumping up and down. But that just goes back to, being yourself, right? And being authentic. But yeah, I was very excited and I appreciate it. I mean, it's, you always look back and you're like, oh my gosh, we're so hard on ourselves, right? I looked at the video and I was kind of breaking it apart. Like, I should have said this. I should have said this way. And then I had to take a step back and say, no, what I did was very brave, right? It's not about, doing things the right way or the perfect way. We read a book on that last year, right? We talked about that, but it's just about doing the brave thing. So I'm very excited I had the opportunity to do that. And it was
But
very
you,
amazing.
but you hit on a really interesting point there. This is going to sound like man bashing, but it definitely isn't because some of my best friends are powerful men, right? But this
Yes.
comes naturally to them.
Yes.
You said, even after, and I said to you as you got off the stage, I was like, that was friggin' awesome. I didn't know you. I was a random stranger
Yes.
until
Yes.
a couple of hours ago, type of thing. And I was like,
Yes.
that was fantastic. You nailed this. The message was so easily delivered,
Mhm.
really well received. Yet you still went back on the videos and self criticized.
Yes, always. Absolutely. I think it's just, I can probably go on a tangent on that. One of the, I don't know if you were there last year, Suki, but one of the speakers, she has a book called Brave, Not Perfect. And I remember when I returned from Thrive, I did a podcast. And it's funny because I asked the gentleman, I said, can I practice with you? And he put up the book in my face and he's like, no, because I want you to be this and not that. Right. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's right. I need to be brave. But I think a big part of that goes to that, right? If you, and this is something I'm taking from the book, so it's not my message, but if you look at a little girl versus a little boy at the park, right? Little girls are dressed in pretty pink dresses. They are playing with their sand castles and their pretty
Yep.
little dolls, right?
Yep.
Or their toys are usually, if it's not a doll, it's typically like a kitchenette, right? Something sewing, something around that, right? And then you see little boys that are playing on the swings and, the slide. And you see them falling, and you see the parents saying, hey, get up, keep
Get
going.
up.
Versus a little girl, you have to be nice, you have to share your toys, you have to be pretty and always be right. And I think that's that, if you think about like the psychology behind it, as children, you see that, you fast forward that into future now, and those things, unfortunately, we bring a lot of those things with us, right?
Yep.
We bring those things, they impact us. So I think that's a big part of it, right? Because I mean, even going before, it was funny because there were the days where everybody that knows me in my close circle knows this. I thought about emailing and canceling because I was
No
so,
way.
yes, I was like, okay. And it's funny because, my husband's like, you're the worst liar. So they'll know you're lying, right? I was like, okay, what can I say that will prevent me from going on that? I remember the day before it was happening where I was like, okay, maybe I don't go on stage, right? And I'm so glad I did. But I think that's a big part of it because right before, I told myself, I said, the worst thing that's going to happen is they're going to hate it And it's okay because at the end of the day, at least I tried, right? But that's not something that is taught to us, right?
No,
Because we're taught to be perfectionists. We're taught to, do things a certain way. We're taught to be nice and share our toys. Hence why when we are, very strong leaders, we're told, okay, you're kind of too alpha, right? Or you're
yeah,
too masculine a little bit, right? But we would never say that, right? If the opposite. So it
no.
kind of goes back, and it kind of makes me laugh because earlier you asked me where does that, how do you balance out the masculine versus feminine? I remember one time when I was younger, I fell off my brother's bike. I stole his bicycle and I was like riding, and I kind of got stuck and I got thrown off the bike, and of course I cut my chin and bleeding and everything. So I walk back and I go like this so I could hide it from my mother. And my mother goes, just walk it off. Walk it off and go home. You'll be okay. Right. So I think that's a big part of it too. So
Yeah.
as I think as, parents, regardless of your gender, I think it's important to remember that because those things do follow children into adulthood, and we've all been children at some point in our lives, right? And now it's following us into our adulthood.
It's so funny because I said to my husband, 'cause Christmas was coming up, and I said to my
Hmm.
husband, so for our little granddaughter, and I said, I'm buying her a climbing frame for
Hmm.
our backyard, not a
Yes,
dollhouse,
I love
right?
that.
I was
Yes.
like, no, we're going to get little Rare a
I
climbing
love that.
frame, right?
I
So
love that.
for exactly that, just because she's a girl doesn't mean she has to have a dog. Don't get me wrong, I
Yeah.
love getting her dresses and things like that as well.
Yes,
But
of course.
equally, she's
Yes.
she's got her boots, her jeans, and stuff like that. And I think
Yeah.
society is changing,
Mhm.
but that's 20 years down the road by the time
Yes.
today's little boys and girls are going to become into
Yeah.
leadership and what have you. But one of the things I was sitting there listening to your presentation with my coaching side, I speak to so many women, young women, actually not even young women,
Hmm. Yeah.
mature women who are just like, I can't do that. I
Yeah.
can't do that. And then they're really struggling to be that authentic version of themselves
Yes. Yes.
because, and I bring it back to me, when I'm direct and I'm calling a spade, I'm a B
Yes.
word as
Yes.
a leader. Oh,
Yes.
she's a
Absolutely.
B, right?
Right. Right.
Whereas my male colleagues, it's like, oh wow, okay, cool. Nobody blinks an eyelid, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
there's, and so what would you say to those women listening? Actually, there's two parts here. What would you say
Hmm.
to those women listening who are like, yeah, Suki Zebra, I get it because when I am my authentic self and I am respectfully, so I'm not talking
Hmm.
abusive, shouting or anything like that, calling a spade,
Hmm.
then I have this feedback to me because we all want to take feedback, right? No one
Yes.
likes,
Yes.
and you want to adapt and things like that.
Absolutely.
But what would you
Yeah.
say to that woman listening?
I would say it takes each and every one of us to change the world. Even though it may feel as if our authentic selves are not good enough or judged or whatever, just do it. I will tell you, I'm someone that, a lot of women are risk averse, right? So I'm
Yep.
someone that have always allowed my fear to stop me. And this was something that yesterday, as I was sitting on the plane coming back home, I was like, wow, I was so afraid, but I feel so empowered. I can't believe I did that. And what's next, right? So I think it's just exercising that muscle. And the more we exercise, it's kind of like working out, right? The more you exercise it, the more it gets there. But I would say you just be authentic because the truth is research, right? And reality shows you that when you're authentic, people tend to appreciate that more. I had a friend of mine who actually gave me one really good advice before I came to Thrive. I called her and I said, do you have any suggestions for me? And she said, don't be afraid to go on stage and just say, look, this is my first time. Help me
Yeah.
out here a little bit because people will say, wow, how is she so bold? Right. And I don't know if you recall, I came on stage and I said, look, I have literally been afraid of falling down on my face wearing these high heels, and I didn't. So I accomplished my mission today, right? And I
They
think
were
that's
really
where,
nice heels.
right? Oh, thank you. I know I had some friends that were taking pictures of the shoes. I'm like, no, take pictures of me up here. But yeah, I think it just goes back to that, right? So what you said is to the women that say that is when you're authentic, as difficult as it is, and as much as it seems as if it's being judged, it in the long run, people will respect it more. And it's just a muscle that if you exercise it long enough, it just makes it easier and easier every single time. Because if we don't do it, who else will? Like you said, 20 years down the line, who's going to teach the next generation and the generation after? Because the truth is, especially in our industry, majority of us do it because we want to help people, right? There's
Yeah.
nothing more honorable than what we do, in my opinion, because we change lives, right? So that this is another way, right? This is an extension of us not just helping people get jobs, but helping change future generations too.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I was speaking with a country manager here in Canada last
Mhm,
night on the train home. We were speaking via text,
mhm.
and something's happened, and
Right.
without going into the details, right? And I ended up on text saying to him, you know what? I am what I am,
Right.
right? I
Right.
was like, I'm in
Mhm,
my lane. I'm
mhm,
staying in my lane. There's
mhm.
going to be people that like me. There's people
Yes.
that don't. I'm okay with that because that is a
Yes.
them problem, not a me problem.
Yes.
And there is enough room in this industry for multiple competitors, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Then I was just like, that's it, I'm done, end of conversation. And I sent my
Mhm.
girlfriend a screenshot. I was like, this was how I responded. She was like, she was like, yeah, start.
Yes.
We shouldn't have to apologize for being successful,
Yes.
right?
Absolutely.
Shouldn't have to be
Yeah.
apologizing for being successful. But the second part of my two-parter to that question was,
Mhm.
and I said this last week at Thrive, we can't solve this problem as women only.
Yes.
There,
Yes.
there's another side to this conversation. There's this,
Absolutely.
and that's men. I'm
Yes.
really fortunate. My husband, massive
Yes.
cheerleader. I've got two boys and a girl. The
Mhm,
boys are always supporting us. Okay, what about this? What about that? I've got some really strong male friends,
mhm.
powerful execs who also support. But I had to go and look for that network, right?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
what about those men that are listening to this? And it may not have dawned on them, not it hasn't dawned on them because they're living in some dark room. It
Right.
just hasn't crossed their mind because you and I seem really strong, and that's how they think we always
Sure.
were.
Right.
So, what would you say to those? I guess what I want them to be listening to this, I want them to listen to this, and tomorrow
Mhm.
go into their office and look at some of their colleagues in a different light and say, maybe
Mhm.
that's why she doesn't put a hand up. Or he, for
Yes.
that matter, right? So we're talking
Right.
about women,
Right.
but it goes to men. So, what would you say to our male allies?
I would say, honestly, just be conscientious, right? Just be more aware. With awareness comes power, right? When you have knowledge is power. I believe in that. So I would say now that we've had this conversation, right? There's always two sides to, different a situation, right? Three sides actually, because there's the two people's perception and then of course the reality, right?
Reality.
Without any feeling or emotion attached to it. So I would say just kind of starting, I wouldn't even wait till tomorrow. Starting today, understand that people that you're dealing with, whether a woman or a man, right? It doesn't matter. Try to kind of put yourself in their shoes and understand the changes, right, in their upbringing and kind of what led them here, right? So I think that's a big part of it. But I think the second part of that answer is, and this may be going back to the message to the women, but it's we have to ask.
I
We have
was
to
just you
ask
just
to,
took the words
right?
right out of
Yeah,
my
because
yeah.
you can't. I have had so many amazing male leaders, right? I have so many amazing male colleagues that are there to support me. My own husband, right? I mean, I was back on stage. He had me on video and he was doing breathing exercises with me
Oh,
before I came on, right? So there are a lot of men that are willing to help. They're, more than we can probably count, but I think we have to ask, right? So once you ask and once it becomes an expectation of, look, this is what I need your help with, then the sky's the limit. Because if you really think about it, I don't know if this is just like a gender issue, right, per se. I think it's more of a humanity thing that we have to tackle together, of whether it's, like I said, it doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman. It really doesn't matter. It's about humanity. The human you're dealing with, right, in your office tomorrow morning, you go in. If they're not raising their hand, what is their story behind it? What was it like for them in their childhood? I read a book one time, and the author said, if your parents are alive, still go and ask what their childhood was like. And I did that. And it was amazing how, when I heard my father's story, I'm like, oh my God, that makes sense. That's why he is the way he is, right? The same goes with all of us. We all have a story. And I think just be conscientious of that and do one thing that's different, right? I said that last week. I'm not asking us to change the world overnight, right? I'm saying take one thing and start doing it differently and see what happens. Keep progress, track of that progress.
And I think I agree with everything you just said there, but I think it's also important to just add this little bit.
Hmm.
As a woman, I don't want you to make allowances for me. I don't want you to make it easier for me. I
Yes.
just want the support. And look, if I'm not right for the job, I don't want the job because I'm a woman,
Yes. Yes.
right? I don't
Absolutely.
want that.
Yeah.
But what
Yeah.
I want a fair chance at it, and then I want the training, the coaching,
Of
whatever that
course.
might look like, right?
Yeah. Of
So
course. Yeah.
it's not the pity we want,
Yeah. No.
right? I think that's
Yeah.
really, really important.
Yes.
And do this not because you want to be say, look, I support women. No, do it because that's who you are, right?
Yes. I
Because here's
agree.
the thing: every man listening to this, he may not have a daughter, he may not have a
Yes.
sister, but he has
Yeah.
a mother,
Yes.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And one of my clients in South Africa, Roy, said it so well. He's so passionate about this. And he said he's got a son and a daughter. And he said, I do everything I do because I want to pave the way for my daughter. I think his daughter's like 9, 10 years old or something.
Yeah.
Pave the way for her to step into
Absolutely.
her own,
Yes.
right? And if we
Absolutely.
don't bring them in, but my point is, we don't want pity, we don't want special
Yeah.
allowances, we don't want any of that. We don't
Absolutely.
want the job
Yes.
because we're women. We don't want
Yes.
the
Yeah.
deal
Yeah.
because we're women.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
We want an opportunity.
Absolutely. And you know what? I think the day we all stop seeing in gender and in color and in like different way, like what people's backgrounds are, it's the day humanity will take it to a new level, right? Because I genuinely believe in that. I think there's enough for everyone in this world, and if
For
we all
sure.
just operated from a place of abundance, I think the world would be such a different place than it is, right? So I think it's important to remember that. It's important to remember that how we treat others, it comes back, right? You pay it forward. You always paid forward. As I said earlier, I've had so many amazing leaders that have helped me. So I try to do that. I try to slow down enough. We're all busy, right? We all have a million things going on, but I make it a point. I do, volunteer work, helping people that are immigrants that come to this country. I train them on how to do their resume during my personal time, right? Or if someone comes to me and says, "Hey, how do you do this?" Right? How did you overcome it? I share. So I think it's again going to back to being authentic, right? We shouldn't be operating from a place of fear, because that's
Yeah.
not how we win.
I like the abundance
Yes.
because that's in essence what I said last night in that
Yes.
message, replying to a
Yeah.
text, but I didn't use the word abundance because
Yes.
ultimately, yeah, you either have a scarcity mindset or you don't. But I think we would be amiss if we don't say, if you are that woman or man sitting there, it's like, I want an opportunity, I want an opportunity. To your point, you've got to ask. And then you've got
Yes.
to be prepared to do the work.
Yes, yes, I agree 100%. It's so I think you remember this last week. I made a comment about, look, it wasn't just my words that got me here. Obviously, I put the hard work in, right? So, it's funny because everyone that knows me, they're probably so sick and tired of me doing the practice runs with them with my speech. Which, by the way, my team was a big part of that, so I can't thank them enough. I mean, they were spending their personal time helping me, but it's amazing to me how the number of practices I did. I mean, right before I went on stage, I was outside in the corner, doing a speech practice again, right? So I would wake up every morning at 4 a.m., do it twice, do it again right before I went to bed. So it took hard work, right? And it's
It
funny
is.
because my husband said it perfectly. He said, "Oh my gosh, we spent months preparing for this, and it was only 13 minutes of your life." And I was like, "Yes, that's exactly it, right?" But isn't that the beauty of
Yeah.
life, right? So it's we have to, like you said, yes, we ask for the opportunity, we're given the opportunity, but then you have to show up too,
Yeah.
right? So that you can motivate, your colleagues and people in your life to keep believing in you and to keep helping you, right? Because like you said, no one's going to hand anything to anybody, and not that it should ever be expected, or is it right? So we have to definitely put the work in, because with hard work and believing in yourself, and obviously saying the right things, doing the right things, and thinking the right things, you can absolutely get there. Anyone can.
Action. Nothing is going to
Yes.
move the dial if
Yes.
you don't do action, because this is a
Yes.
business. You can't ask someone to give you a job
Yeah.
and
No.
sit there and expect it. And unfortunately,
Yeah.
a lot of people do that. So I
Yeah.
think that's
Yeah.
really, really important. Take
Yeah.
the action. Look, I know we're coming up
Yes.
to time. What are your
Great.
final thoughts? What else do you want to get out there? What message? How do you want to close
No.
this message?
Honestly, I just think, I'll go back to what I talked about last week. Words do matter. I said this, and, Jeanette mentioned this at the end of Staffing World, Jeanette Marks. Through our words, one of the things I said in the speech is, through our words, we have the power to build humanity, and we have the power to tear it down. So I would just say, take some time and look at ourselves hard enough, and let's use our words to not just build humanity up, but also build ourselves, right? So it's important when we talk to ourselves, how we talk to ourselves. Again, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, right? Many times as humans, we talk to ourselves in ways that we would never dare talk to people we
Yeah,
love, right? So let's just be aware of the words that we use. How do you describe yourself? And not even that, how do you talk to other people in your life? So that would be kind of my final message. I'm hoping that I can do that talk again, right? More extended and more expanded, because I do believe in the messaging, right? They matter. Words matter when you're trying to attract things in your life. They matter when you talk to yourself, and they certainly matter when you speak to other people, because no one wants to be talked down to or threatened or disrespected,
yeah,
right? Just like we wouldn't. So that would probably be my final message.
yeah. Psychological safety, right?
Yes.
Everybody,
Yes.
it's a basic human right for
Yes.
everybody. Listen, thank you ever so much for your time. If someone wants
Thank
to
you.
reach out to you and learn more, either about the healthcare recruiting
Yes.
and how maybe you can help them, or about
Absolutely.
words mattering, what's the
I
best
love
way
that.
for them to get hold of you?
I love that. Thank you for asking that. So I'm on LinkedIn. My name is Ziba Alizadeh. It's Ziba. Last name is Alizadeh. Or they can reach out to me via email, which is just my employee bridge email. It's ziba.alizadeh@remx.com. So if anyone wants to reach out, I'll respond back. I'll send them my cell phone number. Or if anyone just wants to talk, honestly, and I have the video of Words Matter. I'm excited. I've been sharing it with everybody in the
Share it with
world. So,
me.
I'll send
Send
it
it
to
to
you.
me. Let me get it,
Absolutely.
because I just think it was such an important message. We hear this message all the time, but the way
Yes.
you delivered it, I sat
Thank
in the
you.
audience as a complete stranger saying, "Got to get her on the podcast,"
Thank
because
you.
also delivery matters, right? Words matter,
Yes.
delivery matters.
Absolutely, absolutely. But
Yeah.
yes, definitely please connect with me on LinkedIn. But anything that I can do to be of assistance, I'd love to be able to do that as well. So thank you, Suki. This has been such an amazing opportunity. I'm so glad, right? It's the universe works in beautiful ways. I'm so glad I was sitting next to you. And, like I said,
Likewise.
shout out to Janelle for introducing us. I'm very honored that I met you as well.
Amazing. Thank you ever so much for your time. Really
Thank you.
appreciate this. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Talent Titans, brought to you by Recruitment Professional Forum, where they're building a grassroots community for professionals and leaders in the recruitment industry to collaborate, advocate, and advance the profession. If you liked or were inspired by what you heard, make sure to follow, subscribe, and even leave a review. It lets more talented recruiters like you find the show. Until next time, keep on being a talent titan.